the late 80s, I found myself deep in the throes of addiction, trapped in the endless cycle of use, withdrawal, and chasing the next high. The initial thrill of partying and experimenting had long faded, leaving only the desperation of survival. This eventually led me to the point of homelessness. I ended up in a desolate stretch of wilderness, the Pine Barrens. Everyone in the area knew it, but for those who didn't, the Pine Barrens was a vast forest covering over 1 million acres in southern New Jersey. It was a place full of wildlife and even richer in eerie folklore. The Pine Barrens was the perfect place for someone like me to hide, especially if you had survival skills. Fortunately, I did. The forest was vast enough for someone to disappear into, with enough space to constantly move my camp. I even had an ally who ran a makeshift meth lab in the woods, a place just as well suited for hiding as it was for production. This was the darkest time of my life. There's no sugarcoating it or making it sound glamorous. The lifestyle I was living had no redeeming qualities, and even the few positive thoughts I might have held back then seem hollow now. But through all of it, one thing remained undeniable. The wilderness was beautiful. Even in the haze of addiction, when I was barely functional, the beauty of the Pine Barrens shone through. But by night, the forest took on a different character. The place, which felt calm and serene during the day, became vast and intimidating as the sun set. The forest, which had seemed so familiar, felt like a different world at night. The shadows stretched endlessly, and it felt like the forest was swallowing me whole. It was as if I had wandered into something darker, a place where every step felt like trespassing. I wasn't alone out there. I'd been squatting in the pines for several months, but others had been out there for far longer. There was one rule everyone followed: don't venture too far after dark. At first, I wasn't aware of the legends that surrounded the area, but in time, I heard plenty of them, including the story of a woman who cursed her 13th child, praying it would be born a devil. Legend says that when the child was born, it flew up the chimney and into the Pine Barrens. The locals called it the Jersey Devil, and there was a rhyme they said about it. Mother leads cold and crass, begged for a curse that would last. Satan heard dark and sly, and shaped a child from fire and sky, born of shadow and dark design. Beware the devil of the pine. Everyone had a story about their encounter with the Jersey Devil. But even though I was often strung out and paranoid, I didn't believe in such things. That is, until I did. One evening, near the end of September, I'd been struggling hard with withdrawal. My dealer had been arrested, and I hadn't been able to get my hands on anything for days. I felt miserable, sick, exhausted, and physically wrecked. On the third day, as the cold night set in and the frost began creeping into the air, the paranoia from the withdrawal took hold. Every sound felt like it could be the cops coming for me. I'd already moved my camp twice that day, deeper into the woods, trying to stay ahead of the fear gnawing at me. The longer I sat, the worse my anxiety became. So, I packed up again and moved farther into the pines, deeper than I'd ever been. I figured if I didn't know where I was, then maybe no one else could find me. I set up camp and built a small fire, just enough to keep me warm but not enough to draw attention. I tried to rest, but sleep wouldn't come. My mind was racing. Then I heard something. It was the sound of branches snapping in the distance. The cracking was loud, unnatural. It wasn't small animals, I realized, but something much larger. The sound was coming from above, like something big was moving in the trees. I tried to convince myself it was nothing, maybe just an owl or a raccoon. But the noise got closer, growing louder. It wasn't a small creature. I could tell by the way the branches were snapping that whatever it was huge. Then came a massive thud, shaking the ground beneath me. I froze. My breath caught in my throat. My body tensed, unsure of what was happening. I reached into my bag, grabbed my flashlight, and slowly crept into the woods, away from my campfire. As I moved deeper into the trees, the sounds grew louder. I crept quietly, shining my flashlight in quick bursts to avoid revealing my location, but still hoping to figure out what was making the noise. After a few minutes, I found myself in a part of the woods littered with broken branches. That's when I heard it, a deep snorting sound. My heart raced. I crouched down, trying to hide, and then I shone my light through the trees. For a moment, I saw nothing but the dark outlines of branches and trunks. But then there it was, a massive white shape standing perfectly still. I froze, the hair on the back of my neck standing up. The creature wasn't moving, but its shape was enormous. Slowly, I uncovered my flashlight, fully illuminating the creature. It was a horse, a huge white horse, standing in the woods. My heart slowed as I realized it was just a horse, but then it turned to look at me, and that's when I saw it. Its eyes weren't normal. They glowed red, an eerie, unnatural glow. Suddenly, the horse reared up, letting out a shrill cry. With one terrifying movement, it dropped onto its front legs and charged straight at me. I barely dodged as it barreled past, missing me by inches. I hit the ground hard, and my flashlight slipped from my hand. I scrambled to my feet and grabbed it, but by the time I turned the beam back toward the horse, it was gone. The forest was eerily silent again. I scanned the area, but there was no sign of the horse. It had vanished, as if it had never been there at all. My heart was pounding, and I could feel the anxiety rising in my chest. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me. I quickly packed up and made my way out of the woods, but the paranoia was overwhelming. I felt eyes on me from all sides. Every time I turned around, I thought I saw movement, but nothing was there. As I made my way out of the forest, I heard another sound, a soft wisping noise high above the trees. I shone my flashlight up, but all I saw were the branches gently swaying. Then, a sudden crashing noise rang out from the treetops, followed by a series of loud snaps. Something was coming fast, something huge, and it was moving through the trees above me. Panic set in and I turned to run. But before I could, something crashed down from the branches above, sending branches scattering in all directions. My heart was racing, and I felt blood trickling down my face from the branches that had hit me. I stopped dead in my tracks. The forest had gone quiet again. I could feel the weight of the air around me. I turned around, flashlight sweeping the trees, and then I saw it. That same massive white shape, only now it was changing. Its fur began to darken, turning as black as night. Its red eyes were glowing brighter. Blood trickled from its head, and jagged antlers started to grow from its skull. The skin on its back tore open, revealing monstrous wings that stretched outward. I could barely process what I was seeing. My mind was spinning, and I felt utterly insignificant in the presence of this creature. It was something beyond anything I could understand. In one swift motion, the creature lunged. Everything went black. When I came to, I was lying in the woods, the sun rising. My flashlight was dead, but still in my hand. My gear was still with me, and there was no sign of the creature. I stumbled out of the Pine Barrens, shaken and terrified, and went straight to the police station, where I turned myself in for my outstanding warrants. I spent my time in prison, got clean, and eventually turned my life around. I went to college, earned a degree, and became a librarian. But I never forgot that night in the Pine Barrens. Was it real, or just a hallucination brought on by withdrawal? I don't know, but it felt real and it changed my life. And no matter what, I never want to experience that level of fear and darkness again. Because when you walk down dark paths in life, sometimes you encounter things that aren't just in your mind. A few years back, I went on a solo camping trip deep into the forests of Northern California. I won't say exactly where, because I couldn't find my way back if I tried. It was a Friday morning when I set out, carrying my tent, a backpack, and enough food to last a few days. I also had a map, but it was more for decoration than navigation. I've always trusted my sense of direction over any map. I hiked for a couple of hours and set up camp by a small creek as the sun began to set. The next day, as I explored, I decided to leave the faint trail I'd been following and head further into the woods. The terrain got rougher, but I didn't mind. Around midday, I spotted something unusual through the trees, something man-made. I was curious, so I pushed on. When I emerged from the dense woods, I couldn't believe what I saw. A small town. The place was completely deserted. About a dozen buildings lined the dusty street, looking old yet well-kept. There was a general store, a barber shop, a town hall. It looked like a movie set for an old western, but there wasn't a single person in sight. I called out, but my voice was the only one that answered. I cautiously walked down the main street, peering into windows. The barber shop had empty chairs, but no tools or mirrors. The general store had shelves, but nothing on them. The whole town felt eerie, as though it had been abandoned for years. I thought maybe it was some old tourist attraction that had been shut down, but there was no trace of it on any map, and everything was in too good of condition. No graffiti, no wear and tear, just emptiness. Suddenly, a loud noise broke the silence. It sounded like a foghorn, but there was no ocean nearby. It was so loud and out of place, I couldn't figure out where it came from. I looked around, trying to locate it, but there was no sign of it. The sound lasted for about 10 seconds, then stopped. The silence that followed was even more unsettling. That's when I heard something else. A clicking sound, like claws scraping on a hard surface. It was distant, but definitely coming closer. My heart started racing, and I decided to head back the way I came. But as I took a few steps, I heard the clicking again, this time faster and more deliberate. I glanced behind me but saw nothing. The feeling of being watched was overwhelming, so I started walking faster. The sound grew louder, closer. I spotted a convenience store and ran for it. Fortunately, the door was unlocked, and I slammed it shut behind me, locking it. Inside, the store was just as empty as the others. The shelves were bare, and the coolers hummed, but there was nothing inside them, not even old magazines. The place looked as if it had been set up for business but never used. I was trying to make sense of what was happening, wondering if I had wandered onto private property or stumbled into an abandoned project. But the strange noises kept me on edge. I peered out the front window but saw nothing. As the afternoon turned to evening, I realized I couldn't just run for it. Whatever was out there seemed faster than I was. I found a spot behind the counter, trying to stay hidden but still keep an eye on the door. Nightfall came, and the only light was the dim glow of the moon through the dusty windows. Then the scratching started, faint at first, then growing louder, as if something was circling the building. I gripped my pocket knife tightly, knowing it wouldn't help against whatever was out there. The scratching moved to the windows and then to the door. The doorknob rattled, and I held my breath. After a few tense moments, the sounds moved away from the entrance. I sat there for what felt like hours, listening to the intermittent sounds. I must have dozed off, because I was jolted awake by a loud crash. The front door had been slammed open, the lock splintered, and the door was hanging from one hinge. I froze as heavy footsteps entered the store, accompanied by a deep, guttural growl that filled the whole place. Then came the sniffing, a wet, almost reptilian sound that sent chills down my spine. I crouched lower, trying to steady my breathing, as the claw steps moved slowly down the aisles. Whatever it was huge. I could hear the floor creaking under its weight. It stopped, and I held my breath, terrified to even look. Just when I thought it was over, The foghorn blast sounded again. The creature screeched in response, then quickly bolted away. I heard its footsteps fading into the distance. I didn't waste any time. I grabbed my backpack and cautiously stepped out from behind the counter. The town was silent again, but I didn't trust it. I rushed outside into the empty street and ran for my life, not caring which way I went, just wanting to get as far away as possible. After what seemed like forever, the first light of dawn began to filter through the trees, and I slowed down, exhaustion catching up with me. I splashed water from a stream onto my face, trying to calm down. When I checked my bearings, I realized I was completely off track. It took me the rest of the day to make my way back to where I'd parked my car. I collapsed into the driver's seat, relieved to be back in the safety of something familiar. I drove to the nearest town without stopping and told a few friends about my experience. My buddy, I'll call him Matt, wanted to go back with me, this time armed with proper gear. Cameras, GPS, maybe even a drone. I was scared, but part of me wanted to prove I wasn't crazy. A couple of weeks later, we set out. We packed everything we could think of and retraced my steps as best as we could. We hiked for 3 days, covering more ground than I thought possible. But no matter where we went, we found nothing. No sign of that town, no buildings, no clearing. Our GPS said we were in the right spot, but the terrain didn't match. I wondered, did the town even exist? Did I fall and hit my head, dreaming it all? But no, it was real. That place was out there somewhere. Even Matt agreed, saying maybe I'd gotten turned around or the set had been taken down. To this day, I can't explain what happened. It felt so real, but it doesn't make sense why the town was gone. Why was it ever there? What was its purpose? What was the foghorn for? And who or what was making those clawing sounds? My mountain childhood and the shadows beyond. The older I get, the less I bring up my childhood spent in a remote valley. Not because it was bad, it wasn't, but because some things are just hard to explain. I'm 65 now, and after seeing a program about folklore, I thought I'd share my own strange experiences. I grew up in a small house tucked deep in the Smoky Mountains. Back then, neighbors weren't close. The nearest one, the Gibbons family, lived about a mile down the dirt path. Life was simple. We raised a few chickens, had a goat, and tended a vegetable patch that kept us well fed. But there was always an odd undercurrent in the air, an unspoken tension. My parents had strict rules that my siblings and I never questioned. For one, we were never allowed outside after sundown. If we were playing and the sun started to set, my mom would ring a rusty metal bell, and we had to run straight home. I once asked her why we couldn't stay out a bit longer, like kids I'd heard about in school. Her reply was a cold matter of fact. Because there are things out there you don't want to meet. Another rule: never wander into the forest alone. Our backyard backed right up to a thick woods, which felt like it stretched forever. My younger brother, James, and I would sometimes sneak in during the day, venturing just far enough to feel like rebels. But we never went deep. We had this quiet understanding that those trees weren't entirely ours to explore. One summer, when I was about 11, our cousin Frank came to visit. He wasn't a close cousin, more of a distant family relation, but we always called him Uncle Frank. He was cheerful and easygoing, the kind of adult who didn't take rules too seriously. One evening, Frank suggested we camp out in the yard. "It's a perfect night to sleep under the stars," he said. James and I were ecstatic and begged our parents to let us. After some hesitation, they agreed on the condition that Frank stayed with us. We pitched an old canvas tent right in the middle of the yard, built a little fire, and roasted marshmallows. Around 9 p.m., my mom came out, reminding us to keep the fire low and to stay alert. Frank laughed, brushing off her worry. Sometime in the night, I woke to the sound of shuffling outside the tent. I thought it was the wind or maybe a raccoon, but then I heard slow, deliberate footsteps circling the tent. James was awake too. I could hear his shaky breaths. Frank sat up, pressed a finger to his lips, and motioned for us to stay silent. The sound of steps grew louder, stopping occasionally right near the flap of the tent. Then came a low, guttural growl, unlike any animal I'd ever heard. My stomach twisted with fear. A shadow passed between our tent and the smoldering campfire, a hulking figure hunched with pointed ears and a long snout. Frank grabbed his knife and held it ready, but he didn't move to confront whatever it was. The circling eventually stopped, and we stayed frozen until the first rays of sunlight broke through the tent. When we finally ventured out, we found deep tracks in the dirt around the tent. They weren't human, and they were too large to belong to any dog or bear. Frank told us not to mention it to our parents, but my mom knew. She gave Frank a long, knowing look when we returned inside, and he just nodded. After that, the rules tightened. No more camping outside, even with an adult. Other strange events followed. Our chickens began disappearing one by one. At first, we blamed foxes, but there were no feathers or signs of a struggle. They just vanished. My dad reinforced the coop with metal bars and padlocks, but one morning, we found the door wide open, the locks undone as if by a key. Not a single chicken remained. Near the coop, we found a tuft of coarse, black fur that didn't match anything we recognized. My dad took it to town, but no one could identify it. That night, we heard howls echoing through the hills. Long, mournful cries unlike wolves or coyotes. I peeked out my window and saw shadows moving along the tree line, tall, impossibly large figures slipping between the trees. The next morning, my mom sat us down and repeated the rules. No going out after dark, no wandering into the woods, and no ignoring strange sights or sounds. As kids, we started forming our own theories. James swore he saw glowing eyes watching him from the woods one night, but when he told Mom, she shushed him and warned him not to spread stories. One autumn evening, I was outside picking apples just before sunset. I knew I should head in, but I wanted a few more for a pie. Suddenly, I heard movement behind me. Turning, I glimpsed a figure in the woods, upright but hunched, with shaggy fur and eyes that gleamed in the dim light. I dropped the basket and bolted inside. When I told my mom, she didn't scold me for being out late. Instead, she locked all the doors and windows, gathered us in the living room, and had my dad sit by the door with his shotgun. We spent the night in silence, listening to distant howls and the occasional snap of branches. After that night, things quieted down. The strange happenings stopped and life returned to normal, at least mostly. My parents never relaxed the rules. Years later, when I was grown and had my own kids, I asked my mom about those times. She hesitated before admitting they suspected something unnatural lived in those woods, something dangerous. She didn't want to frighten us as children, but she'd seen enough to believe the rumors. Now, when my grandkids beg for ghost stories, I tell them about the valley and the importance of respecting boundaries. I don't give them all the details, no need to scare them too much, but I do make sure they understand that the world is full of mysteries, and some of them are best left alone. Something strange is happening with the wildlife in the deep grove.
Im natatambe.
Most days, I'm working overtime at a car parts factory in Michigan. Back in the day, I spent my weekends hunting in the woods, tracking deer or small game. That changed a few years ago when I got bitten by a tick and ended up with alpha-gal syndrome. If you're not familiar, it's a frustrating allergy to red meat. Imagine being a hunter who can't eat what he catches. Annoying doesn't even begin to describe it. I never got into hunting birds, and while poultry's fine, the passion for hunting faded. Instead, I turned to outdoor survival and wilderness camping. Some tick allergy wasn't going to rob me of my love for nature. I even considered writing a guide someday, a book to help others reconnect with the wild or find themselves. One fall, I took a week off and headed to the Sycamore National Forest in West Virginia. I'd been there before but stayed on the usual trails. This time, I wanted to go deeper off the grid. I packed my gear, drove to a safe spot to leave my car, and set out. The first 2 days were exactly what I needed. The air was crisp, the trees were alive with shades of orange and gold, and the scent of pine filled the air. I walked for hours without seeing a soul. By evening, I set up camp near a bubbling stream. Fishing didn't bother my allergy, so I caught a few and enjoyed the quiet. Nights were spent by the fire, jotting down ideas for my book. I didn't get far. Mostly, I just stared into the flames, letting my mind drift. On the third day, I decided to explore north. I'd heard there were ancient trees there, ones untouched for centuries. Hoping for inspiration, I packed a small bag and marked my trail as I went. Around midday, I stumbled upon a clearing. It wasn't marked on any map I had. The trees opened into a near-perfect circle, and in the center was a sight I'll never forget. A group of animals sitting together, like they were holding some kind of meeting. There was a buck, a rabbit, a coyote, and a young black bear, predators and prey side by side. They were all still, facing the same direction. It was so bizarre that I thought they might be statues. But as I got closer, I could see their fur shifting in the breeze, and their eyes were open, though they didn't seem to notice me. Felt wrong, completely unnatural. I thought about taking a picture, but something about the moment made me hesitate. Besides, my phone battery was low, and there was no signal out here. When the bear turned its head slightly toward me, I stopped dead. It didn't seem hostile, but I wasn't about to test it. "All right," I said, backing away. "I'll leave you to it." The walk back to camp felt longer. I couldn't shake the eerie feeling. The whole encounter didn't sit right with me. Maybe the animals were sick or someone had drugged them, but who'd do that out here? The best explanation I could come up with was some kind of gas leak seeping up from the ground, making them act strangely. That night was unsettling. The usual forest sounds, crickets, owls, were absent. The only noise was my fire crackling and the occasional breeze. I stayed up late trying to write, but nothing came to me. Around midnight, I heard rustling. Grabbing my flashlight, I shone it into the dark, but saw nothing. The sound circled my camp, slow and deliberate. "Who's there?" I called out. No answer. Eventually, the noise stopped, and I managed to fall asleep just before dawn. By morning, I decided it was time to leave. Maybe I was just spooked, or maybe something was genuinely wrong, but I wasn't sticking around to find out. An hour into my hike back, I saw something on the trail, a dead rabbit. It looked exactly like the one from the clearing. Its body was untouched, but its eyes were missing, just empty sockets. I didn't touch it, just knelt for a closer look. No signs of a predator, no blood, nothing. I kept moving, trying to shake off the unease. Then I found the fox. Same condition. Eyes gone, body pristine. My stomach churned. 100 yards later, the deer appeared, lying on the trail. I gripped my knife, though I wasn't sure what good it would do. When I finally came across the bear, leaning lifelessly against a tree with the same hollow eyes, I lost it. "This isn't funny," I yelled into the woods. No response. I ran, not caring about stealth, until I reached my truck. I sped away, heart pounding, not stopping until I hit the highway. Later, I told my friend Drew about it. He suggested it might have been some weird cult or ritual. I had no enemies, so the thought of being targeted felt absurd. But who knows? That experience stuck with me, and though I've returned to the wilderness since, I've never been back to those woods. I grew up in the deep forests of northern Vermont, far from any town. My family lived in a cabin my grandfather had built years ago. We were self-reliant, growing our own food and hunting for meat. As a kid, I loved the freedom of the wilderness. I often camped in our yard or went on hikes with my older brother, Lucas. One summer, when I was about 13, Lucas and I decided to camp at a small lake a few hours hike from our cabin. It was a place we'd visited many times before. We packed some supplies, sleeping bags, and food, setting out early in the morning. The hike was peaceful, and we arrived by noon. We spent the day fishing, skipping stones, and enjoying the clear skies. As evening fell, we built a fire, roasted marshmallows, and swapped ghost stories. Around 10 p.m., we decided to call it a night. The fire had dwindled, and the forest had grown eerily quiet, as it often did far from civilization. While settling into our sleeping bags, I heard whistling. It wasn't random. It was a tune I recognized, an old lullaby our mother used to hum, something called Moonlit Path. I thought perhaps our parents had come to check on us, which was unusual since they trusted us to handle ourselves. "Lucas, do you hear that?" I asked. "Yeah," he replied, frowning. "Who's out here whistling that?" We stepped outside the tent, scanning the area under the bright moonlight. The lake and tree line were visible, but there was no sign of anyone. "Maybe it's the wind," I suggested. Lucas shook his head. "The wind doesn't carry a tune." The sound seemed to drift from beyond the trees. It wasn't hurried, just the same melody over and over. It gave me an uneasy feeling. "Let's just ignore it," Lucas said. "Could be a hiker passing through." We went back to the tent, but the whistling persisted. It moved, first coming from the left, then the right, yet always at the same distance, as if whoever was whistling was intentionally staying hidden. After an hour, the tune changed. It was still familiar but unidentifiable, like a forgotten memory. "This isn't normal," Lucas finally admitted. "We should head back." It was late, and hiking in the dark wasn't ideal, but staying felt even worse. We packed the essentials, leaving the tent to retrieve later, and started down the trail with our flashlights. The whistling followed us, never growing closer or farther. We called out, but no one answered. Only that unending melody accompanied us. At a fork in the trail, the whistling abruptly stopped. The silence was more unsettling than the sound had been. Then, from the path ahead, we heard a low humming, like someone softly singing without words. "Let's take the other way," Lucas whispered. "It'll add an hour," I reminded him. "I don't care," he insisted. "I've got a bad feeling." I didn't argue. We took the longer route, and the humming gradually faded. When we finally reached home at dawn, Mom looked surprised but didn't press us for details. We never told our parents about the whistling, and Lucas and I rarely discussed it. A week later, we heard that a hiker had gone missing near the lake. Despite search efforts, no trace of him was ever found. People said he was experienced and knew the area well, which made it all the more baffling. Years passed. I moved away after high school, but Lucas stayed, taking care of the cabin after our parents passed. A few months ago, during a visit, Lucas brought it up over beers. "Do you ever think about that night?" he asked. I admitted I did. He told me he'd recently gone back to the lake. "Why would you do that?" I asked. "Wanted to hear it again," he said. And I did. The same tune. "Did you see anyone?" I asked. "No. I didn't stick around long enough to find out." We sat in silence until Lucas mentioned something else. He'd researched the lullaby Mom used to hum. It was an old folk song about spirits luring travelers into the woods. "Why would Mom sing that to us?" I asked. "Maybe she didn't know," Lucas replied. "Or maybe she did. I haven't returned to those woods since. Sometimes, late at night, I imagine I hear faint whistling outside my window. I tell myself it's just my imagination, but I always keep the curtains closed. I don't know what we encountered that night. Maybe it was just a person playing tricks, but it doesn't explain the missing hiker or how the sound followed us. All I know is there are things in those woods I don't want to understand.